It's time to bring you yet another amazing episode. And now, welcome your host.
This is Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. I'm the host, Omobola Stephen. On Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen, we share disruptive yet constructive mindship conversations. We focus on personal development and self-improvement topics, and we occasion professionals who are adept in these topics, often profound insight on topics that is going to transform your life, moving you from where you are to where you need to be. Now, personal development and self-improvement is a lifelong process that you and I must endeavor to embrace in order for us to see our life really transformed as it was originally meant to be. This is the mission and the focus of Laweli Bamobola Stephen. We want to on the show. I will be focusing on how we can handle crisis management, business world, and also in our personal life. And I have Marty Strong, who is a retired Navy SEAL officer, a combat veteran who is currently serving as a middle market healthcare CEO. He's an author and a chief strategy officer on Library by Omobola Stephen. Thanks for joining me, Marty.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you on the show. I'm looking forward to this conversation as we hope to serve the audience with these mindship conversations on this topic indeed. Now, crisis is a strange mindset to be in. Interestingly, you feel like literally everything is out of control. How comfortable can it be leading to crisis in an organization?
Well, it's extremely difficult, actually. I mean, we're all people. Organizations are made up of human beings, and human beings have feelings. And some of those feelings are, concerned for their future. Some of those feelings are related to their self-esteem and their place in their profession. So they all are going to, be affected when there's a dramatic change. And when I say dramatic, I mean dramatic because human beings, when their emotions get stirred up, they become dramatic. So management may make a decision to do something, and they use all the logic and they use math and they use all this, scientific approach and everything, which is very non-emotional. And then they make the decision, and then they announce the decision to a whole bunch of emotional, normal human beings who are going to see it as a dramatic decision and not really appreciate all the forethought. So a lot of a lot of dealing with this type of thing is communicating, training and communicating everybody in the workplace, including the leadership, because they're the communicators, that people are going to get fired up when there's a disruptive change announced, whether it's an internally generated one or whether it's because of some external event.
All right, good to know that. So, can they tackle crisis alone in an organization? Now, if they really need support system, the support system they need to have in their boat.
Well, I think part of this is the way people are not trained or prepared, and in life in general, they're not trained and prepared. Especially, I'd say in the last 50 or 60 years. Before that time, people had hard times. Parents had gone through hard times. Grandparents and great grandparents had gone through hard times. So there was a certain effort in parenting to inoculate young people by showing them how tough times could be, giving them a hard task, making them do something that's difficult, making them do something that takes a long time to accomplish. These are all things that they thought were great life lessons to prepare them for life and the surprises that life can throw at you. The last 50 years or so, things have been pretty comfortable. So parents have stopped this process for the most part, which is nice because you want your kids to go through, a nice upbringing and not be that concerned about the future and what could go wrong. But you're also not imparting these kind of survival skills, these coping skills. So if you take that base kind of the foundation, that's the people that you hire. Those are the people that show up in your workplace. Those are the people that eventually become leaders. So that's the human component to this. You've already started with somebody who may or may not have ever had something difficult in their life or something that radically changed their position in life. In other words, they haven't been fired, or they haven't lost their house, or they haven't suddenly found themselves without a car. And because of that, I think it kind of lands on the shoulders of leaders in organizations to just assume that and to prepare them through training and communication about how to develop psychological resilience. Not because you know something's going to happen that you have planned, in preparation for the day that it does happen. And it serves two purposes. It serves making your organization a little bit tougher, and you get practice scar tissue by thinking about it. And so it prepares them for something that's organizational, but it also prepares them as individuals for something that may happen in their personal life. If you have an organization that's prepared like that, making decisions, changes, shifting people in jobs, whatever the input is taken a little bit more in stride instead of taking it straight on the chin like a knockout blow. And I say all this because it's the basic fundamental requirement. You can't really lead or manage any of this if the population that you're trying to manage or lead is completely unprepared for this. You're going to get 500 individual reactions, and they're not necessarily going to be helpful.
And now, who are the set of people that we need to watch out for? Are there any traits?
Well, I think the ability or the willingness to work as a team, and the core of that is empathy. So we're kind of back to human development again. If you don't care about the people in the hall, across the hall, if you don't care about the people 5 cubicles away, because you're focused on your job, and that's the way you've been groomed. You've been taught to focus on your grades in school, then focus on getting a job, and then your job has been do the task that you're prepared and educated and trained to do. Well, you're not going to have a whole lot of human empathy for anybody else because that's the way you were prepared. And as a CEO, I've been now 16 years, you kind of get what comes through the door. And unless you intervene and create a culture of all the things I've just described from the communication and educational standpoint, but you also have to hire for that culture, because you want to hire people that are willing to learn, willing to change, willing to work with other people, and hopefully during the filtering and selection process, they've shown some willingness or natural ability to be empathetic with other people's conditions. If you can get people to move in that direction and you can hire people that are already in that direction, then you can get an organization that can actually execute team-oriented project work and actually care about the other people on the team. So I'll give you a quick example. If you're in an organization where there's multiple project teams who never talk to each other, they're in the same building, and say 4 out of the 5 project teams are not in a crisis mode, they're getting everything done on time, but the 5th project team is in crisis. They're behind the timeline. If they don't get this thing in, the company's going to take a big hit. They got a deadline, and they're trying to put together pricing for a bid. They're trying to get the bid all done, and they're going to be there every night till midnight for a week. And they're only 1/5 of the population of that particular group. If the other 4/5 are in their car at 5 minutes to 5 in the evening and driving out of the parking lot by 5 o'clock, leaving that 5th team up in the building with the lights on the 4th floor, then there's no empathy in that organization. Because you can walk in there and say, is there something I can help you with? Do you have a daycare issue that's been created by this? Do you want us to get you some pizza? I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do to help. And you may even have actual skills that you can offer up to help, because you're not in a crunch mode and you see that they are. An empathetic organization that is team oriented operates that way. They would never drive away and leave people in a lurch.
And now, really, if for anything that we want to overcome a crisis, right, what is the mindset we need to adopt?
So I read about this a lot more in probably my 3rd book, Be Different, but it's about understanding that the universe is in a constant state of change. And there are quotes that go all the way back as far as people have been quoting their philosophies, etched in stone related to this. It's kind of a fool's errand to believe that you have some control over your world and you can lock it in place. You can't lock in the weather. You can't lock in relationships perfectly. Your car is going to decay over time. Everything's changing. The universe is constantly in change. And some of it's evolutionary and may or may not align with it you think it should be heading towards. And some of it's de-evolutionary. Of all the species of animals that have lived on this planet, probably 80% of them aren't on this planet anymore. They had their day, they lived for 1 million years, 2 million years, 200,000 years, and they went on and they were replaced by new species. Now, why do I say all that? Because if you think, and if you're allowed to continue to think that stability is real and stability equals safety, then you're going to be more shaken when something changes. Because you think the world, the way it's supposed to be, has just been turned upside down. And so what I try to explain to people is it's the exact opposite. The world, the real world, is in a constant state of change. It's in a constant state of manipulation and adjustment. And to think that safety and stability is the norm is actually an illusion. It's an illusion we all like to grasp onto, we like to believe in. So one of the things you can tell, whether it's talking about business strategy in general or about individuals' professional lives or even their personal lives, is you need to start thinking about what you should look like and what you want for yourself and for yourself professionally and what your organization should look like, and push it out 2 or 3 years and start thinking bigger picture. And if you start doing that and start looking around, you'll realize that everything around you is in a constant state of moving and changing towards that future. And that way, especially in business, let's say you have a skill set, you paid the money to go to college, you've got a degree on the wall, it got you your first job, it's kept you employed for 10 years. But if you have your head in the sand and think, okay, as long as I just show up for work and do a good job, I'm good to go. But in reality, that particular profession is waning and eventually it's going to disappear. And I can give you lots of examples, but if you're a particular kind of programmer, if you're a particular kind of expert, like you're a Latin teacher, you can come up with all kinds of examples. They were valuable. You did everything you're supposed to do. You checked all the boxes. You were a great performer, and then nobody needed it anymore. That's not your fault. That's just the way the world works. So if you're aware of the world, if you're looking up, then you don't get surprised by things like that. And you can actually kind of retool yourself for the next thing. You can be a software engineer with certain certifications and see suddenly now the thing is to be in robotics. And so what do I need to get into robotics? Go to school at night, get some other certifications, and then you jump off the one escalator as it's about to hit the top, and you jump onto the bottom of another escalator. And that's just my advice to people, because if they think that way, then the universe isn't a scary thing and change isn't a scary thing. It's just nonstop opportunity.
And I'm thinking in my head, really, as leaders, is it okay to stop being in a crisis mode?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, crisis, the definition of crisis, if you think about what I just said, is when the status quo changes for most people. They think that's crisis. And the Chinese, symbols for crisis are a combination of change and opportunity. So even the ancient Chinese realized that a crisis, excuse me, a change may feel like it's unseating you and unsettling you, but at the same time, it's reflecting an opportunity in the universe. A door's opening. So we've all looked at crisis as it's got to be a war, it's got to be, the market's crashing and all that. But for individuals, crisis is whenever change hits them, they're not prepared for. So everything I've been saying here, if you prepare for it and you think about it in a more positive manner, then there is really no, it's kind of like crisis in lowercase letters instead of crisis in all caps. It's something that you can handle and you can think about, and you can think about in advance, and you can do things personally, professionally, or as a leader of an organization.
Thank you so much, Marty, for sharing your insight. Now, away from a crisis, now I'd like to introduce to the audience of Omobola Stephen, Shima Wood beverages. That is the CBD infused set cells. They're offering 30% for any of my audience or any of my audience or clients who purchase in their store just with my promo code. Now, just a little introduction about Shima Wood beverages. Now, Shima Wood is an award-winning CBD seltzer. The combine of full-spectrum CBD with natural foods, shrubs, And also, they deliver a refreshing stress relieving drink that eases tensions and promotes relaxation. Now, enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code at shimawood.com. Now, to the discussion. Matthew, now of mastering disruption in order to survive and thrive. If you have an idea on what I'm talking about, how can this happen? And also, do you like to share with my audience a particular or biggest disruption of your life?
Well, first I'll give you a couple of personal disruptions, and then I'll talk about how I think you can deal with them in advance proactively. So I went from being a senior, very accomplished Navy SEAL officer at the end of 20 years to working in the financial services industry, cold calling 6 or 7 hours a day, talking to strangers and trying to convince them that I was the guy to manage their money. And I don't think I understood how much that move from being in the Navy to being outside the Navy was going to be disruptive. And it was disruptive for two reasons. One, I was working for commissions and fees only. There was no salary. In the military, I was getting my salary every month. It just showed up in the account. So financially, it was disruptive. And I had little kids and all that. From a standpoint of psychology, obviously, you come out of an elite organization like the SEALs, you have a pretty good self-esteem. You feel like an accomplished master of your trade. The next day, I'm sitting there calling strangers off of a list I purchased, and I am not, I am not a master of anything. I am the absolute apprentice at trying to figure out how to do this because it's sales. And I had no sales experience, and even my undergrad and graduate degrees had nothing to do with sales. Didn't teach sales, so I was functionally, professionally um, disrupted from kind of at the top of my game to square one, and then physically, financially, going from a stable, steady, very, very safe income to if I don't get a client and I don't sell them something, I don't have any money to pay the bills. So that was the first one. Um, the second one was I left a very large billion-dollar corporation and jumped in as an equity partner in a very small company. And I mean, really small, like 6 million a year compared to leaving. I was a senior vice president in one. I thought, okay, I'm gonna do this entrepreneurial thing, right? I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna do sweat equity, pay for my portion of the ownership, and see if I can build this thing. And again, it was going from kind of a lofty position in an org chart where you're making big decisions and you have big budgets and all that type of thing, to suddenly you're scrambling, just trying to figure out, can you make payroll? Should we or shouldn't we hire a particular person? And if we don't, who's going to cover for that? So those are the two big disruptive events professionally. The obviously, everybody went through COVID and the disruption of COVID. So here's how I usually talk about handling it, and it comes from my SEAL background. In the SEAL teams, we prepare leaders for things that are going to go wrong. Now, military pilots do the same thing because anything can go wrong in the cockpit of an airplane, especially if somebody's shooting at you. So they go through all kinds of drills, and the drills sometimes get stupid and zany because you're trying to come up with any what if scenario that just might happen. And in reality, 99 times out of 100, the plane flies perfectly, gets to where it's supposed to go, comes back, and everything's fine. Same thing with a SEAL mission. But what we were taught was to prepare ourselves and to prepare our men and as leaders to plan as if everything we set up is going to go fall apart. It's going to be disrupted by something. The weather is going to change. The enemy is not going to be there, or it's going to be there 10 times more in more strength than we thought they were going to be. The way we were going to get in the vehicle, whether it's an airplane and parachuting or a helicopter or a submarine, suddenly gets changed. And now we got to plan out a whole different way to do it, and we're behind the timeline of the mission. So what does that do to the mission? Well, we get there, now we have to run for 2 hours to get to the target to catch up with somebody else's timeline. So this is the stuff that they prepare you for by training you. And you can do it physically, like you do in airplanes and SEALs, or you can do it as a tabletop exercise. So you can bring everybody in a room. Now, this is where it transitions to how you can do this in the regular world, the regular commercial world. Any organization can do this. Even government can do this. You bring everybody in a room, and let's say you're a business and you have a key supplier. So you bring everybody in a room and say, we're going to do an exercise for 2 hours. And I'm the leader. I'm going to walk out after I give you the game plan, which is also you have to come up with a way to solve the problem. And here's the problem. You guys all know that we use ABC Corporation as our primary supplier. They just canceled the contract with no notice. You got 2 hours to figure out how we're going to fix this. And you walk out. So now they all have to sit there and look at each other and, okay, somebody's got to start calling around. We got to find other vendors. We got to find other supply sources. Well, one of the lessons they'll learn right off the bat is if they never thought about this, they don't have a backup plan. They don't have a B or C vendor in that category, and they're starting from scratch. Right off the bat, they've learned a lesson about being disrupted and not being prepared for that eventuality. You can do it with your top sales guy quits, or your top sales guy quits and goes to your number one competitor. That's even worse. That's a double hit. You could have a financial scenario where something happens. You can have it it could be an internal problem. A major system fails and you have to replace the system from scratch. It could be an external problem like COVID or the supply chain issue. And what you do is you basically do this on a regular basis. You could do this for 2 hours once every quarter. And you could rotate what the dilemmas are, what the disruptive events are. You could change from internal to external. And what will happen is everybody will start realizing we need backup plans. We need to start thinking about this. We have to have foresight. We have to anticipate disruption. Because, back to my rule of the universe, you're going to be disrupted. In either micro or macro ways, you're going to be disrupted. So it's kind of ridiculous to sit around thinking, okay, we've got everybody in their seats and everything's working great and the machines are humming, processes are working, customers are happy, we can just chill out. That's that fallacy of stability, that's a good thing. You actually have to prepare for instability. So that's how I would do it, and that's how I coach and mentor and talk about doing it, because you can do it. It doesn't cost a lot. You can do it by just bringing people into a room and shocking them. You don't have to have all leaders either. It's even better if you bring in a leader and a whole team related to that particular area, and the team has to come up with a solution. And so then the leaders start realizing it's not just me trying to come up with a crazy idea to fix this. I can leverage all this talent and all this experience.
All right. Thanks for sharing that once again with the audience. Now, let's look at how we can see risk as opportunities. I'm sure you have an idea on that, seeing risk as opportunities. Now, the chances that we do not take odd horse, I'm thinking in my head, but sometimes some risk can turn to crisis if we are not careful about the choices or the decisions we take at this time. Now, the risk can be mitigated while crisis comes with a high level of uncertainty. So how can we balance these two?
Well, I think the first thing is you have to have a mindset, a mental framework that acknowledges that there are going to be threats and there's going to be opportunities. And most people don't see, everybody recognizes that a threat is a high risk issue. It's harder to get people to see opportunities as a positive because of the change rule we were talking about earlier. If you have to jump through that window of opportunity and it disrupts your company or disrupts a division in your company, the leadership may perceive that as a bold, calculated risk to seize the moment and jump at that opportunity. But everybody that's actually going to have to do it, all the people who have to execute this, are going to be thinking about the change impact. So part of the risk has to be analyzed from the standpoint of losing people. Can you communicate clearly enough? Have you already built this team so they're used to changing the the dance card and moving things around a little bit? Because the more flexible the workforce is, the more flexible and thoughtful the leadership is, then the more likely they're going to identify the risks, real risks and implied risk quickly, and then they'll start mitigating those risks but not to the point where they just say, we're not ever going to go after an opportunity because there's always risk related to opportunity. And that's where the art of mitigation turns into just opportunity or growth avoidance. Because if you know what you're doing, the status quo, and you think you've got this much risk involved and you've mitigated it, then anybody that's responsible for mitigation of risk is trying to say, no, don't go after that opportunity because it's going to change everything. It's going to disrupt it. It's if you think about this way, that mindset is like a librarian that never lets anybody borrow a book. All the books are exactly where they're supposed to be. And that librarian sees somebody walk in and pull a book from a shelf and they go into a crisis mode because I had it perfect before that person showed up. That makes no sense because the point of a library is to spread knowledge through people getting access to the books. So another mindset would be, we have to make sure that all the books are here and that people bring their books back on time so that they can be constantly churning and moving out to new minds and new people can read and take advantage of them. There are two different ways of looking at the same job, but those two mindsets also exist in businesses and in leadership teams.
Really, in life, how can a person, how can they tell that they are going to crisis? Because if possible, if they have a crisis, how can they overcome it? Or if there are many crises, how can they overcome them?
So the first thing, how do you know that you're in crises? In the war colleges that teach the senior officers, they do big, long historical studies of all the battles and everything. The nice thing about the military is it's got historical documentation. You don't have every company that's ever existed in the world all documented where you can go in and find out with the leaders what they did, what they didn't do. The military, you can't. You basically can look at the battle, you can figure out what time somebody made the bad decision to go left instead of right, and you can see the cascading effects after that. So there is a comparison between battles and business. The number one thing that causes failure in military battles is called the failure to anticipate. So right back to where we were saying before, the failure to anticipate is that you assume that you understand everything and there's no reason to think any bigger or to search for any more facts. You assume that you have the right people in place, you have the right systems and processes in place, you're doing the right producing and selling the right products, the right services, you're in the right market, and you've got the right the right people doing everything and the right leaders in place. So if you assume that, then what you're basically doing is you're walking forward with blinders on, and you think that you're not. You think that you're walking forward confidently and competently, but in reality, because you have that mindset, you are not going to recognize a crisis until you're deep in it. Because most crises don't start like a meteorite hitting. Most crises evolve. Even COVID. Hey, this will be over in 2 weeks. Now maybe 3 weeks. Okay, 4 weeks. All right, we're gonna get this all done, and everybody will be back to work within a month. And then really nothing got back to normal for another 2 years in any way, shape, or form. So most crises are a slow burn. Most crises, most events that you see, like a 9/11 or the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, seem like a shock, seem like a momentary crisis. But then historians look back and say, oh, wow, there's all these indicators going back sometimes years leading up to this. The breadcrumbs take you right to the moment. So the perception is, for the people that are unprepared and have not exercised and trained and practiced to anticipate things going wrong, the assumption is that everybody is going to get hit with the crisis. It's momentary. There was nothing we could have done about it. And that is not true. Everything I've said already, you can anticipate, you can prepare, you can train, you can think, get your people to think in a crisis reaction mindset by being proactive and having all kinds of measures in place to include their mindset when they come in, which takes us to what do you do when the crisis happens? Well, in the worst case, you get everybody that you possibly can into a room, virtual or otherwise, and you tell them what you know, the true facts. So everybody's kind of on the same sheet of music. And then you say, what we have to do is kind of ignore what we have and what we are and what we know. And I want everybody to kind of think with a blank piece of paper, how do we reimagine ourselves? How do we reinvent ourselves based on these facts that I gave you today? So in other words, you face crisis like it's a project that has to be worked through. You work the problem, whether the problem is 10 different problem sets or whether it's one problem set. You work the problem and you have as many brains as you can work that problem with you. And if you can, you bring in outside brains to help you. The reason I'm saying all this is because the opposite effect, which is really detrimental, is the people in charge hunker down in a room and try to figure it out. If it's a real crisis, you're not going to come up with a solution. First off, look at all the people that report to you, look at all the wealth of their knowledge and their talent and all their contacts and their network outreach. I mean, think of all that. And you're just going to say, no, I don't want any of that to help me. I'm just going to get Bob and Susie and Jack, and we're going to go in a room and we're going to figure it out because our titles say we're supposed to. That's a really bad way to react to crisis.
Marty, do you have any exciting news for the audience? Perhaps a project you think it's going to add value to them in the long run. You can share if you have any.
Well, my third book, Be Different, came out in December, and it focuses on creativity and innovation. And things that I learned, because I'm on several boards, but one of the boards I'm on is called Best Robotics, and it's a robotics program that was started by a bunch of Texas Instrument engineers 31 years ago to try to get kids excited about engineering and technology. So kind of the short story is these 6th to 12th graders are given a task, they prepare for 8 weeks, and they go in and they compete with other teams. And sometimes there's as many as 17 or 18 teams of anywhere from 10 to 20 kids per team. And what they do is they basically come up with the entire solution. They're not told how to do it. They're not given a set of instructions how to build these things. And so when you go in there, if there's 20 teams, there's 20 different robots. So it's a real expression of creativity and rapid prototyping and experimentation and testing without any of them being engineers, without any of them knowing the rules. And the subtitle for my newest book is How Navy SEALs and Entrepreneurs Bend, Break, or Ignore the Rules to Get Results. I wrote the book because of that experience of watching these kids, but I also started talking to brain scientists, and what I found out was that unless you have Alzheimer's or some other kind of medical problem, your brain can function as far as creativity is concerned at 65 or 70, just like it did at 6 years old. Mechanically, it's all still there. What's really happened is it's all been washed out and forced out through compliance, obedience, and this has started in school and it continued on in the workplace. And I'm talking about intellectual compliance and obedience. Don't raise your hand until you've had enough years at the firm. Don't raise your hand and ask a question to stick with the syllabus. And eventually people stop raising their hand. And so if you think about it, the way the brain works, you have a task-oriented mechanism of the brain. You have an explorer side of your brain. The explorer side is the risk-taking. That's the looking over the next hillside, trying to find the next valley where there's better food, maybe better water. The task side, we're all familiar with because it's the to-do list. It's to do the little things. It's to do the meticulous things. It's the craft side of the human experience. So we've all been trained to focus on the craft side. And therefore, anything that has to do with creativity, our brain doesn't even, it's like atrophied. It doesn't kick in. So all these things we've been talking about, you have to be creative and imaginative to be proactive and to anticipate. You're imagining the future in the exercise I talked about. So you have to allow yourself to do that. And, that book talks to how to do that, how to clear your mind, how to become curious, and then how to become very, very creative after you've been curious enough to take in all the information and insights.
Thank you so much. Can you share your social media and your website? We like to have them so we can connect and learn more about you and what you've been up to.
Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of the third book. I'm just finished another novel, my 10th novel, so I'm starting to work on getting agents for that. I manage a healthcare company, and the healthcare company started out with one employee, at the end of, with the beginning of 2017. So 1 employee and 20 doctors and nurses, and now we're up to about 20 employees and 90 doctors and nurses. So that's been fun, and that's been a challenge. And a lot of the things we've talked about today doesn't really matter if you learn all these things. Every organization goes through it. And so as you're growing a company, obviously it goes through it even more so. You're in a constant state of morphing and changing into the next best thing.
Thank you for joining me on the show, Marty Strong, for sharing your thoughts on today's show, especially tips and strategies that can help us in overcoming crisis, both in the leadership of an organization and also in our personal life. Thank you once again. It's been a great time. I've been Marty Strong, a retired Navy SEAL officer and combat veteran who's currently serving as a middle market healthcare CEO and also an author and a chief strategy officer on the show with me. Great to have you once again. And thank you for your time and for this insight you provided to the audience. Wish you best of luck in your projects and in your book projects that you have once again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me once again. It's really my pleasure. I remember you once again for joining me on Live YouTube by Omobola Stephen. I'm your host, Omobola Stephen. I need you to stay safe. And remember, if you'd like to catch up any missed episodes of the podcast, you can do so on any cross promotion platforms or any podcast distribution platforms you bump into online. And do have a great time listening to the podcast. Till I come your way, I need you always to stay safe. Talk to you soon. Thank you once again, Marty. That was a great show.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review.